Purpose, a caring approach to business. Welcome, everybody!
Some will tell you that what you want isn't on the menu. Don't believe them. Cook it up yourself and show them how good it tastes. A quote by the ever-brilliant Buffy Sainte-Marie as retold by Jeremy Dutcher at one of his live performances. Welcome to Pollinating Purpose, a caring approach to business. I am your host and punk rock softie, Mariam Waliji. I also act as the Social Enterprise Program Manager and Coach here at Pillar. For those of you who are new here, Pollinating Purpose is a show all about supporting organizations who seek to create social impact through their work. Whether nonprofit, for-profit, or grassroots organizations, you'll learn key considerations to starting or growing your social impact business in a long-term and sustainable way. Today, I am incredibly thrilled to have my colleague Eleanor Gebrou as our guest today. Eleanor is a community builder with a formal background in psychology, local government, and journalism. She is the program manager at CityStudio London, a business professor at Fanshawe College, and moonlights as a singer-songwriter. She has been lucky enough to find ways to intersect art with community a few times over. In fact, her work at CityStudio relies on the intersectionality of her professional background to affect the impact that she wants to have. For those who are unfamiliar, CityStudio London is an innovation hub that brings together city staff, students, faculty, and community to co-create experimental projects to make London more sustainable, livable, and joyful. Pillar Nonprofit Network works with the City of London staff and various academic institutions to make this magic happen. I have been lucky enough to get to know Eleanor both personally as well as professionally, and she is a wealth of art and knowledge. I can't wait to dive into conversation with her. Hey, Eleanor.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's going good today. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for being here.
Of course.
So today we're going to talk about CityStudio London and all of the things that you've done with that project. So before we dive into it, can you share a little bit about CityStudio London and the work that you've done with that project?
Right. So at CityStudio London, we are partnered with the City of London and the 5 academic institutions, post-secondary academic institutions in London. There are, I think the only ones we're not partnered with is maybe Ivy, and there's a technical school, but the rest we're partnered with. What I do is I chat with folks at the City of London, not counselors, mainly managers, canvass them and ask them about their needs, write those down, and then based on what their needs are and the problems that they address, I create a match between them and a class at one of those 5 institutions, and I broker a sort of project between the 2 parties that both meets the city's needs and for deliverables, but also is lined up with the academic institutions, the classes and their particular aims, so that there's sort of mutual satisfaction. Each of these projects is linked to the City of London's strategic plan and aligned with at least one STG. And if you don't know, an STG is the UN came out with a list of, I think, 18 sort of goals, strategic goals.
Yeah,
right.
We had a conversation with Luis a few episodes
Excellent.
back, so we've gotten deep into the SDGs.
Yeah.
So we're well familiar with those. Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's kind of like the city has those priorities and the strategic goals for the city as a whole, and then those academic institutions can come up with projects and ways to implement action on those goals. Is that kind of
essentially?
Okay. Cool, yeah. Nice. And then, so CityStudio London is in a silo. It's not the only city studio, right? It's part of a larger group?
Right, it's part of a global network. So CityStudio Global is a thing. CityStudio, the idea was, I think, it comes from Vancouver, so that's sort of head office. Right. And at this point, it's a model that is, it's a global model. So there's a CityStudio as close as Sault Ste. Marie and as far away as Ireland.
Cool.
yeah, so it's sort of it exists all around the world, and we're constantly able to look at each other's work and learn from each other.
That's neat. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah.
Have you been able to connect with those like global participants as well, or is it kind of mainly just seeing the various reports and projects that you put out?
Yeah, we have network calls because some of the issues that come up within this type of work is incredibly unique to this type of work. So it's good to be able to check in. We've definitely, at London, because we're past the pilot stage also, we've had other groups come to us and ask questions about what can be done for them. So I'm really grateful that Misha, who came before me and sort of started this work at Pillar, she was an incredible resource to those different groups, and I'm appreciative of being able to observe her work.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, Misha is great. I had limited experience in working with her, but just a brilliant mind. It's wild what she knows. Okay, so you mentioned you've had a chance to work with the various academic institutions around London through CityStudio. What are some of the key takeaways or learnings from that experience? You know, I think you've been on the project around 2.5 years, something like that?
Yeah, 2 years, I would say. The experience of working with institutions, particularly. Yeah. So I've learned a lot. I've learned that I think if you're unfamiliar with London, the two institutions that come to the forefront of your mind when you think about London are Western and Fanshawe. And so I think this work really taught me that King's and Brescia and Huron are also their own institutions. They have their own cultures. They have their own benchmarks. And that means that the way that I interact with them is different.
Right.
Also, institutions are, it's an older kind of, I would say academia is an older kind of institution. There we go. I struggled to get to that thought. But that means inherently that even though they're doing this innovative thing, there are structures that you need to interact with. Academic institutions are naturally hierarchical. They like standard procedure. So when dealing with these institutions for the first time, take the time to learn their particular culture. Consider what might be their standard practice. But also, they're looking for something from you. So don't forget that. They are looking for innovation. They're looking for good ideas. They're looking to be better than they were. They're looking to make their mark.
Yeah, that's a really good point of, academic institutions are often rooted in a system because they're so big that they need that sort of standard practice in order to keep things going and keep the momentum going. And coming from places like Pillar or coming from more community-oriented groups, you have like the malleability and the flexibility that they don't necessarily have. So that's like a huge offering that you're bringing. So yeah, like keeping in mind that it's very much a mutually beneficial experience, and you working like if you're a social enterprise wanting to work with an academic institution, it's not like they're doing you a favor by working with you. It's truly it should be a two-way relationship kind of thing.
Exactly. Just keep in mind your cultural differences institutionally, and learn to speak their language. You have to be a little bit bilingual in a way.
Yeah, I'm curious, and you may not have the answer to this, but if someone, maybe didn't necessarily go to a higher education institution, in terms of learning that language, how might they go about that?
I don't know if you would have needed to go to an institution of higher learning. I sort of mean, when you're in different industries, there is just certain verbiage that's used, or a particular lens with which people view things. So learn to adapt that lens. So that could be, particularly with institutions, I would say, first, one thing, they all are looking at each other. So understand the value, like standard practice. If you learn the rules of a particular space or a business, I think then you know when to break rules. I just sort of mean learn the lens of
Yeah. And I feel like oftentimes you can find that on their website, or you could find that in even just that higher institution's strategic plan or whatever it might be. Like
some of it is research, some of it is just like if you have a question, taking after you have a meeting or an exchange with someone, taking that question somewhere that is safe for you. Having mentors or I'm really lucky in that I belong to a global network for CityStudio, and also that CityStudio London is nested within Pillar means that I have access to all kinds of folks who are navigating these spaces, peers really. So there's a lot I learned just by doing and then kind of taking away questions.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And just being able to chat with other people who have engaged with those academics institutions and being like, hey, this is my first time doing it. What could you suggest? And just being able to have those conversations with people that you feel comfortable asking questions to.
Totally.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. So, we've talked about some of the things to be aware of when engaging with these institutions. What have been some of the benefits that you've seen from these kinds of partnerships between the City of London and those institutions and an organization like Pillar, like a more community-based organization? What are some of the benefits that you've seen, and why might someone want to work with an academic institution?
I mean, the cross-pollination of expertise has been incredible. Students want to work. They're eager. And they haven't yet been limited by the boxes institutions are in out of necessity. That's not a sort of, that's not any shade towards any kind of institutions, but part of belonging to an organization like the City of London is learning the rules of how to navigate and where is the red line. Students don't see that. They don't have that in mind. So they're able to dream in a way that's different. And they're actually smart. They're really smart.
Yeah.
So I think they're able to give an offering that's bright and they have the energy to back it up.
Yeah.
And what they are gaining is experience, legitimacy, practice working with an institution. So they're, it's something for their tool belt, really to move forward. So I like to be a part of these exchanges because, I don't know, I think you have to, if you are working in this sector, believe that we can do more and believe that we have something to offer each other. It's good to be a part of that.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point of those students. Yeah, they're really smart. Like they've kind of figured out their niche. They're excited about a certain area, and they're kind of, by being in these academic institutions, are kind of at the helm of a lot of the research that's coming, or things that are just being tested out. And it may or may not work, but
it's an experiment.
It's an experiment, yeah. And to experiment needs, some risk for sure, and also an organization to validate that, and that's where those community organizations can come into play, because they're on the ground, front lines, connecting with the community on a more tangible level than, a more removed institution is. So like that marriage, really, it makes sense.
It does make sense.
Yeah. Cool. So, you've had your experience over the past 2 years of this kind of collaboration between City of London institutions and community. What are some of the top tips that you could share with social entrepreneurs who are hoping to work on projects with academic institutions? Like, how might they approach wanting to work with a school?
Right. Look for strategic alignment. Get to know the particular institution. Come armed with connections. If you can, like, again, because the City Studio model existed prior to us, there was some element of this is tried and practiced.
Right.
That appeals to them as well, particularly before they're willing to sink funding into it. If they're not your funding source, then I think you have a little more leverage to move forward with an interesting idea. But I would say get to know that institution, find strategic alignment, speak in the language of SDGs or speak in the language of their strategic plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just want to know that there will be a benefit to them. Institutions of higher learning aren't particularly interested in taking big risks. So you need to demonstrate to them that there's real value.
Yeah.
And sort of a low threshold for risk.
Yeah, that's a good point. So even just having been able to pilot something before going into that conversation of saying like, hey, we've done this on this small scale, with a community center or, just within the neighborhood, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
It's viable. Let's take it bigger.
Exactly. So yeah, there's a model there. Let's expand it. Or, there are other ways to form legitimacy. It could be, in my particular case, I'm an educator. I'm a professor myself.
Right.
I also have a background in local government. I have an MPA. So, I'm able to sort of speak to both. And if you particularly aren't, consider meeting with someone who is. Consider aligning yourself with people who are able to speak to your idea with some kind of legitimacy. Just strengthen your case as best as you can.
Yeah, and I think what you brought up, using the language of the SDGs or their strategic plan, that kind of comes down to the core element of speaking a shared language. And so something that you can connect on, and also somewhere that, if there are things to navigate through, you have that shared language to help support moving through, like maybe those differences in ideals or those differences in like benchmarks and goals. Like, how can you make sure everyone's goals are met, not just, one with potentially more power or one with like more ability to carry out the work, whatever it might be.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. And, I think that also brings up an interesting point of how, if you're going into a conversation with a higher academic institution, like higher education institution, there can be a perceived power imbalance there as well. What are just some things for folks to remind themselves of as they're going into that? Like, we talked about how it is a reciprocal relationship and it is a two-way street, but is there anything else that you would suggest them being like, remember this, like it's not as much as there's a perceived power imbalance, like what do you have as well?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to offer in that way, but just try to remember that you have an offering. You have something that they want. They do want to, first of all, they're competing with each other. So they're driven to outperform each other, number one. They're actually interested in educating folks. They're interested in being the best at educating folks. So if you have an idea that's well teased out, just remind yourself you have really something to offer. Find as many strategic connections as possible, as many, look at their strat plan and find as many sort of touch points as you can. Make it easy for them. Again, these institutions are low risk. They don't want to take they don't want to gamble on you. That's not what this is.
Yeah.
So make it easy for them.
Yeah.
And if you've done the work, have the audacity to stand there and behave like you've done the work. This is if you believe what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Particularly that piece of make it easy for them. And sometimes it's not even necessarily that they don't want to, but they, I've worked with professors before. the time is very limited.
That's
so, if you're asking them to, spend a lot of time investing in understanding something that might not play out, they likely won't.
That's right.
And not because of any malicious intent or whatever. It's just that they don't have the time. And so making it very easy, your case very obvious of cut and dry. This is why it makes sense. Here you go.
At CityStudio, I draft the project plan. I book the meetings. Professors don't have to book a meeting. They don't have to book a Zoom. I can go above them and actually get parking passes from the affiliate institutions. When I'm talking to the city staff, I ask for 10 hours a semester. That means in 4 months, I'm asking for 10 hours max of their time. I field their emails so that students aren't contacting them directly. I create, we drafted, what was it? A form for the students to fill out every 2 weeks with questions, concerns. I amalgamate that information, give it to the, I play middle person a lot. I edit student reports if they ask me to.
Right.
Because what I'm trying to do is create an ease of atmosphere so that people can just sort of see the benefits of each other's. That's all I'm doing.
Yeah.
I help to scale things down half the time. Especially new city staff, they might have an incredibly ambitious idea. They're like, wow, I have 70 students to do something for me.
Yeah.
I will change London.
Yeah.
And they, they bring me an incredibly ambitious idea, but I have to consider what is the student capacity, what's conceivable within a semester.
Yeah.
Maybe we can scale that back and ask the question before the question you're trying to answer, and then maybe the quality of that deliverable will be something you can apply very quickly rather than sort of a half-done ambitious, so I have to hold both perspectives.
Yeah, it almost kind of reminds me of the idea of those SMART goals of what is actually measurable, what's attainable,
exactly.
what's time bound.
Most of what I do lives in scope is kind of everything actually with these kinds of projects. Keep in mind, institutions know that, these institutions they're not dreamers. So speak to them with sort of a practical mindset, and make it seem as if they're benefiting more. I would even say that.
Yeah.
Make it easy for them.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. So yes, you worked very closely with these students and with these projects. I'm curious, what have been some of your favorite projects that you've worked on? What's been some of the best parts of CityStudio London for you?
There's two to come to mind for opposite reasons. We did a project on Queen's Park. It was a massive class with a massive amount of stakeholders, and we only scratched the surface. So it's not necessarily that the deliverable was so amazing, or but it was just that. So Queen's Park is a park in the old East Village.
Yeah, by the Western Fair Market, right?
Yes. And Western Fair would be one of those stakeholders. There's a lot of people that care about that park and what happens to it, including the Western Fair, including we had someone from the heritage sort of side of the city because that whole neighborhood is filled with heritage homes. We had somebody there from BRT because their road expansion impacts Queen's Park directly. We had someone there who does murals and is in charge of public art from the city because there's interest in, shaping and creating some public art. We had someone there from the BIA because they advocate for the community's needs and desires within that, So there's so many stakeholders to Queen's Park. So it was incredibly ambitious to get them in a room, to get them all together, to try to craft a shared idea for that park. That was really cool and just sort of practical, granular. I'm someone who grew up in central London. So just the idea of it's cool for me.
Yeah.
Also, I think the same semester we did a project where we built, we had a sort of competition to come up with schematics for a park bench and an anchor. What I liked about that was that it was incredibly technical, incredibly useful, like practically, and the city loved it. They actually won an award and moved forward, and it's like, that's just happening.
Yeah.
So, you know, a bunch of students came together and now there's infrastructure. Like, I can't help but be proud of that.
Yeah.
And
That's really neat. And, you know, in your bio, you mentioned you moonlight as a singer-songwriter. For the record, she's phenomenal. It's absolutely outrageous. But I'm curious, you know, you mentioned this sort of bringing in all parts of yourself into this role. How has your artwork sort of influenced and shown up in CityStudio London as well?
Right. So the City of London is a UNESCO City of Music. So UNESCO designates creative cities, and what that means for London is that as of now, music is being woven into our infrastructure with respect to what we are willing to incubate within the city. It's a more of a strategic priority, and it's something we want to grow as a sector, as a point of interest.
Right.
So I've worked on a couple of UNESCO projects, which is cool. One of them in particular involved incubation, like how are we going to incubate music in London?
Right.
So that was with Kate Graham, her class, and we did a pitch competition. And so I listened and gave feedback as students pitched ideas like London as a festival city.
Right.
Or London with a music district.
Right.
And those ideas were vetted by city staff, by the mayor of London was on a panel with us as well.
Cool.
We had an entire panel of, city staff members, the mayor of London, and there were a couple other institutions high sort of on the music food chain that were represented. But I just got to hear ideas about how to make London more musical, which is, you know, it was hard not to wear my music hat, you know, in that conversation.
Amazing.
But yeah, incubating art it's not the only arts project I've run either.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been great. Wow, this has given me an opportunity to reflect on this work, and it's been rewarding.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad. Okay, before we wrap up, where can folks find out more information on, you know, past CityStudio projects or the CityStudio Global Network?
Right. I forget the particular hyperlink, but if you
I can add it in afterwards.
Cool. If you put CityStudio Global into Google, it will auto-generate a website. Same with CityStudio London. You can see all past projects there.
Cool. Amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Eleanor. It's lovely to chat with you, and I definitely learned more than I knew about some of the stuff that you've been doing. So now I know. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Excellent. No, it was great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you once again to Eleanor for sharing her learnings from CityStudio London and her experience working with the City of London and all of the various academic institutions in the city. If you're interested in learning more about past CityStudio London projects, you can check out the website at citystudiolondon.ca, or if you'd like to learn more about the Global Network, you can definitely do that as well with the CityStudio Global Network. If you're curious about other programs and projects coming out of Pillar, head on over to pillarnonprofitnetwork.ca for all of that fun stuff. Once again, I am your host, your guide, your business bud, Mariam Waliji, and this has been Pollinating Purpose, a caring approach to business. Thank you for coming along for the ride. I'm so glad that you're here.